No one saw this coming. The Walt Disney Company's Wish animated film that just released this Thanksgiving week has absolutely bombed at the box office. It's even worse than the worst of projections. Before we get into this, I'd like to ask if you please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so we can continue to give you the best in pop culture news and analysis. But let's get into this here. I wrote this article up over at thatparkplace.com. You can find the link in the description below. Disney's Wish collapses at the Thanksgiving box office, underperforming even the worst projections by 50%. Indeed, even the worst projections by 50%. That's how terribly this film did. Before we get into that, we have the actual numbers here. Through Friday, the film has only grossed 20.2 million over the Thanksgiving weekend. It took in 2.3 million on Tuesday during previews. On Wednesday before Thanksgiving, it only raked in 8.3 million. Thanksgiving Day, it took in 3.9 million. You expect that kind of decrease there because people are going out, spending time with their family, doing all of their Thanksgiving traditions that they do rather than going to the movie theaters. And then on Friday, after Thanksgiving, it took in $8 million less than what it did on Wednesday. So not very good at all. Absolutely terrible. Only 20.2 million. And we're already through Friday. Box office analyst Luis Fernando notes the film will likely only gross between 30 million and 35 million in its 5-day Thanksgiving weekend, and only between 8 million and 23 million in its 3-day opening. So he's looking at the film maybe bringing in just 10 million more between Saturday and Sunday on the low end. That for that 3-day, and then he's thinking that it maybe is again only going to be doing maybe $10 million on Saturday and Sunday on the low end, looking at that 5-day because it's already done 20.2 million. He does offer some comparisons here in this post on X, comparing it to Encanto, Strange World, and Elemental. You can see Elemental did a 11.7 million. I don't think that's really a good comparison given the fact that it didn't come out over Thanksgiving. It came out back in the summer. Then you had Encanto and Strange World. There was a little bit better comparisons because I do believe they did come out over Thanksgiving. I know Strange World did only 5 million there on its Thanksgiving Day. So it performed even if you look at the Thanksgiving Day comparisons, this film is performing worse than a movie like Strange World, which lost Walt Disney Company hundreds of millions of dollars. But we just to show you how awful this film is performing and how bad it is compared to what the projections were. If we go back just to the end of October, October 26th, Box Office Pro released their long range projections for this film, predicting that it would make between 45 million and 65 million in its 3-day opening weekend. There's no way it's going to get there now. Again, just to remind you, we're looking at 18 to 23 million in a 3-day weekend, significantly down from that 45 to 65 million that they were predicting back at the end of October. And then looking at that 5-day weekend, they're saying 64 to 94 million in the 5-day Thanksgiving. And now we're looking at what, 30 to 35 million. So huge declines from those original long range projections from Box Office Pro. We would get Box Office Pro would decrease their projections, seeing that there wasn't really any kind of momentum for this film. They at the beginning of November, those projections had declined between 40 million and 60 million. The 5-day Thanksgiving projections were down to between 57 million and 86.8 million. So we're already seeing those projections decline. And then on November 21st, which was just at the beginning of this week, the outlet would lower their projections again. This time, they claimed the film would bring in between 35 million and 45 million in its 3-day opening weekend, and they noted it would gross between 49 million and 66 million in its 5-day. So again, 35 and 44 is what they're saying in its 3-day. If we go back up and look at what Luis is saying here in a 5-day, he's saying 30 to 35 million in the 5-day. So it's not even going to do in 5 days what they were projecting it to do in 3 days at the beginning of this week. So that's how much this box office for this film has completely collapsed. And then if you want to get into the percentages, you can see that's a 50% decline from Box Office Pro's November 21st projections to what Luis Fernando is now projecting the film will gross in its 3-day opening weekend. The 5-day Thanksgiving projections have declined by nearly 40%. So huge declines just from the beginning of this week. Absolutely collapsed, disastrous for the Walt Disney Company. And not only are these box office grosses projections in decline, but because they're in such decline, that means Walt Disney Company is going to lose even more money than expected. It was believed that this film wasn't going to really kind of even touch that $500 million mark. that it needs to hit because it has a production budget of 200 million. Thus, you need to hit that 500 million in order to cover the costs of marketing as well as the split that theaters take from the box office gross. And that's 500 million worldwide. We haven't really seen what the international box office is. My guess is it can't be that much better than what we're seeing at the domestic. But even without the international, there's no way that it's hitting that 500 million right now. This movie is pretty much dead, and the Walt Disney Company is going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars on it. And there's just no way that it ever sniffs that $500 million break even mark at all. So now you might be asking, why is the film performing so poorly? Well, it does have an A minus cinema score, and you might think, oh, that's actually pretty decent. That usually means it'll have some long legs. People are actually enjoying it. Well, that's not the case when it comes to PG animated films, as Luis Fernando points out here. He says an A minus cinema score isn't as good for PG animations, unfortunately. It's like a PG-13 film receiving a B plus. So Wish's performance might most likely be closer to Lightyear's legs than Encanto's, for instance. So an A minus, when you're looking at these kind of PG animated films, it's not very good. You really need to get into that A plus range for those animated films to really have some good, strong legs. We can also look at some of the user reviews that we've seen on the various websites. At IMDb, it currently has a 5.9 out of 10 average. That's not very good at all. That's really bad. And then if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, 77% when looking at the all audience score. Again, I think that's average. And you can see there it has an average rating of 4 out of 5 stars. And so I think it's just likely that the film isn't very good. People aren't saying like, oh, you need to go watch this. You should take your kids to this. It's a good film. No, they're saying the opposite. We have WDW Pro here at that Park Place. When he reviewed the film, he described the film as, quote, Disney propaganda that they likely believe was nostalgia or homage. So clearly not a very good film. People aren't kind of spreading the word about it. So I think that's probably one of the big reasons why people aren't going to see it, because they think that it's just a bad film. But I also think that there might be, I think this is an aspect that's happening as well, because we're seeing this kind of across the board at the Walt Disney Company. I think people are actually boycotting this film. And the Walt Disney Company, I think, actually recognizes that this is one of the major risks that they face with their company. In a recent Form 10K filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, they noted that it faces risks relating to misalignment with public and consumer tastes and preferences for entertainment. Specifically, they said consumers' perceptions of our position on matters of public interest, including our efforts to achieve certain of our environmental and social goals, often differ widely and present risks to our reputation and brands. And I think their brand and their reputation has been significantly harmed by them embracing radical social agendas, which we have seen throughout the past couple of years that they have indeed embraced. And I think a lot of people now view the Walt Disney Company as not a family-friendly company. They have lost that reputation as being a family-friendly company because they are constantly promoting homosexuality, transgenderism, abortion, and more with these radical kind of social policies that many families, I think, are rejecting. And I think those families aren't out there like on a picket line going like this. We're picketing them, we're boycotting them. They're not really signing any petitions or anything like that. They are just keeping their money in their pockets, or they're finding somewhere else to spend it rather than going to the Walt Disney Company. So I would describe it as kind of a soft boycott. It's not a brazen out there, I'm boycotting the Walt Disney Company. It's basically like, yeah, I'm just going to spend my money elsewhere because I don't really trust this family, or I don't trust this company anymore, because they are now kind of promoting a lot of these anti-family policies. So I definitely think that does play into it. Obviously, I think we can see, I think the Wishes box office is a perfect example of that. You can look at the Marvels, that is a Disney subsidiary, and you can see that as well. But I'll leave it to you guys. What do you make of Wish's disastrous box office, and why do you think it is so bad? Let me know in the comments below.